I want you to picture a scene for a second. It's Dallas, Texas. The year is 1985. We're at this massive conference on science and religion, and the vibe in the room is just electric. Everyone is craning their necks because Alan Sandage has just walked in.
And just to give some context for why that mattered, Sandage wasn't just some guy. In the astronomy world, he was basically royalty. I mean, he was the protege of Edwin Hubble. The New York Times literally called him the grand old man of cosmology. He was the guy who figured out the speed of the universe's expansion.
Right, a total heavyweight. And the thing is, the room is completely divided. You have the theists sitting on one side and the atheists and skeptics on the other, and everyone is watching Sandage because he's a known quantity. He's ethnically Jewish, but had been, virtual atheist since he was a kid, a total hard facts guy.
Exactly. So the expectation in the room is clear. Sandage is going to walk over and sit with the skeptics. That's his tribe. That's where a man of science belongs.
But he doesn't. He walks right past them and sits down with the theists. And then he gets up on stage and drops a total bomb. He tells this room of intellectuals that at age 50, he has become a Christian. And the kicker. He says it wasn't because of some emotional crisis or a personal tragedy. It was the science.
Specifically, the Big Bang. He told them that the Big Bang was a supernatural event. He said science could take us to the first event, but it couldn't explain the first cause. He basically realized that the universe was just too complex to be explained by physics alone.
That image, the atheist astronomer crossing the aisle, is really the perfect hook for what we're digging into today. We are doing a deep dive into the investigations of legal journalist Lee Strobel. We're looking at his interviews with people like philosopher and physicist Stephen Meyer, along with a whole lineup of biochemists and cosmologists.
And the mission here is pretty specific. We are looking at a challenge to this very deep-seated cultural assumption that science and faith are mortal enemies. The argument in our sources today is that recent discoveries in cosmology, physics, biology are actually pointing toward a creator, not away from one.
Which is, well, it's definitely controversial. I think most of us grew up with what the source calls the warfare model. You have science, which deals with the reality, and you have religion, which deals with comfort, or fairy tales, depending on who you ask.
Right, the idea that they are fighting for the exact same territory. You see it in quotes from physicists like Steven Weinberg, who famously said that science makes it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. The overarching narrative is that science explains the how, so you really don't need a who.
But there is that middle ground people try to take, right? I remember hearing about NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria, which is really just a fancy way of saying, hey, stay in your lane.
Yeah, that was Stephen Jay Gould's concept. The idea is that science deals with facts, the empirical universe, and religion deals with values and morality. As long as they don't touch, everyone gets along. It sounds very diplomatic.
It does. It sounds like the perfect truce. I won't tell you how atoms work, and you don't tell me how to behave. But reading through these sources, Stephen Meyer, who is one of the key experts Strobel interviews, absolutely hates that idea.
He really does. And his reasoning is pretty compelling. He points out that biblical religion doesn't just offer advice on how to be nice. It makes specific, factual claims about history and reality.
Right.
If you say, God created the universe, that is a factual claim about the origin of matter. If you say, Jesus rose from the dead, that is a claim about a biological and historical event.
So if you force religion into just the values box, you're basically gutting it.
Precisely. Meyer argues that you can't separate them without watering one of them down. Science has metaphysical implications, like where did it all come from? And faith has physical implications. They intersect. And Meyer's point is, don't be afraid of the intersection. The source material argues that the evidence actually breaks in favor of faith.
Okay, but we really have to address the F word here, faith. Because usually when people hear faith in this context, they think of a blind leap. They think, I'm going to close my eyes to the evidence and just believe what I want to believe. Is that what these sources are pushing?
No, and that is a critical distinction to make early on in this deep dive. The definition of faith in these sources isn't believing against the evidence. It's inference to the best explanation.
Inference to the best explanation.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the exact same method detectives, lawyers, or historians use. You look at the clues, the raw data, and you ask which story best explains all of these facts.
So it's not a leap into the dark. It's following the evidence where it leads.
Right. It's a step in the direction the finger is pointing.
All right, let's follow that finger. Meyer presents what he calls a robust case for theism based on an ensemble of evidence. He breaks it down into 6 specific categories. Let's start with the big one, the biggest one, the beginning.
Cosmology. And this brings us right back to Alan Sandage. See, for a long time, the prevailing scientific view was that the universe was eternal. It had just always existed. There was no creation event because it was just always there.
Which is a very comfortable position if you're an atheist, right?
Yeah.
No beginning means you don't need a beginner.
Exactly. But then comes the Big Bang and Einstein's general relativity. Suddenly, the data is screaming that the universe had a definite starting point. Space, time, and matter all came into existence at a specific moment.
Okay, so we have a start date. But why does that equal God? Why can't we just say, we don't know what started it, and leave it at that? Why jump to a supernatural cause?
That's a totally fair question. The argument Meyer makes is about the nature of the cause. If nature itself, meaning space, time, and matter, came into existence at the Big Bang, then the thing that caused it cannot be nature.
Ah, I see.
It has to be something completely outside of nature.
Because you can't be your own mother.
Right, you can't cause yourself to exist. So the cause must be transcendent. It has to exist outside of space and time. And it has to be incredibly powerful to generate an entire universe. So you start building a profile. Transcendent, timeless, powerful. That starts to sound an awful lot like a creator.
Okay, I follow the logic there.
Yeah.
So the universe exists, but then we have to look at how it exists. And this brings us to the second area of evidence, physics, and specifically this idea of fine-tuning.
This is where the numbers get absolutely insane. It turns out the laws of physics aren't just random. They are balanced on a razor's edge to allow life to exist. If you change them even a tiny fraction, the whole thing falls apart.
The source mentioned the expansion rate of the universe. Give us the scale here, because I think 1 in a trillion goes in one ear and out the other for most of it.
Okay, let's try to visualize this. The source uses an analogy that really stuck with me. Imagine you take the entire continent of North America, every single square inch of it, and you stack it with dimes. And not just a few inches deep. You stack those dimes all the way up to the moon.
Okay, that is a ridiculous amount of change.
Billions of miles of dimes. Now imagine you take one dime, paint it red, and hide it somewhere in that pile, somewhere between Earth and the moon, somewhere across North America. Then you blindfold a guy and tell him, pick one dime. The odds of him picking that one red dime on the first try, that is the precision we are talking about for just one of these parameters, the expansion rate of the universe.
That is terrifyingly precise.
It is. If that expansion rate were faster by that tiny, tiny fraction, no stars or galaxies form, everything just flies apart. Slower. The universe collapses back into a black hole before life can even start. And that's just one setting. There are dozens of them.
So the skeptic's view that this is all just a happy accident feels a bit like winning the lottery every day for a billion years.
It led the astronomer, Sir Fred Hoyle, who was a staunch atheist, by the way, to say that it looks like a super-intellect has monkeyed with physics. He admitted his atheism was greatly shaken by these facts.
Okay, so the stage is built, the lights are set perfectly, but a stage is empty without actors. We need life. This is where we move into biology, and this is where things get really interesting with DNA.
Right, the origin of life. For a long time, back in Darwin's day, we thought cells were just blobs of protoplasm, just simple, structureless goo. But now we know that at the center of every cell is DNA. And DNA is code. It is literal information.
But hold on, nature creates patterns all the time. Snowflakes, crystals, ripples in the sand. Why is DNA different? Why can't it just be a really complex snowflake?
That is the crucial question. Meyer distinguishes between repetitive order, like a crystal or a snowflake, and specified complexity. A crystal is like repeating A, B, A, B, A, B. It's orderly, sure, but it doesn't carry a message. DNA is more like a Shakespeare sonnet. It's not just a pattern, it conveys specific instruction.
It's a language.
It is a literal language. It instructs the cell on exactly how to build proteins. And Meyer's argument is based on our uniform experience of the world. Whenever we see information, whether it's hieroglyphics, a line of computer code, or a book, it always comes from a mind.
So if we see code in this cell, the most logical inference is a coder.
Exactly. Even Richard Dawkins, who is arguably the world's most famous atheist biologist, admits the genetic code is uncannily computer-like. Strobel's argument is simply that computers don't write their own software.
Okay, sticking with biology, there is another headache for Darwinism in the source material. The tiny machines.
Biochemistry. This is Michael Behe's work. He looks at things like the bacterial flagellum. It's basically an outboard motor attached to a bacterium. It has a rotor, a stator, a drive shaft, a propeller. It literally spins at 100,000 RPM.
It's an engine.
It's a microscopic machine. And Behe coined the term irreducible complexity. The idea is natural selection works by preserving small, useful changes, right, step by step.
Right. Evolution modifies things slowly over time.
But a motor doesn't work if it only has a propeller. It doesn't work if it only has a drive shaft. It only works when all the parts are there at once. So a half-evolved motor is completely useless. Natural selection wouldn't preserve it. It would discard it as dead weight.
So it's like a mousetrap.
Exactly the analogy he uses. If you take away the spring or the hammer or the catch, you don't catch fewer mice.
You catch 0 mice.
Right. The function is entirely gone, so it couldn't have been built piece by piece. It had to be assembled all at once.
Which implies a blueprint.
Okay.
Okay, so we have the microscopic stuff down, but what about the fossil record? I feel like that is usually the stronghold for evolution.
Well, Strobel's sources point to the Cambrian explosion. It's often called biology's Big Bang. About 530 million years ago, we see the sudden appearance of most of the major animal body plans.
And when the source says sudden,
Geologically speaking, it is the blink of an eye. We're talking 20 to 35 novel body plans. And the problem is the complete lack of transitional forms. Darwin predicted we would find millions of intermediate steps leading up to these complex animals, but in the Cambrian strata, they just appear.
like a blank book where suddenly on page 50 you have 20 complex chapters written all at once?
That is a great way to put it. It represents a massive sudden infusion of biological information. And again, where does information come from?
A mind. Okay, speaking of minds, that is the final piece of the evidence. Okay. Us. Consciousness.
Yes, the hard problem of consciousness. This is something that materialism really struggles with. If you are just a collection of atoms, just physics and chemistry, how do you get the feeling of pain? Or the subjective experience of the color red? Or the sense of, I am?
The computer made of meat problem. Why does the meat have feelings?
Exactly. You can explain how the neurons fire. That's just physics. But you can't explain why the firing of neurons feels like being in love. Physics describes motion. It doesn't describe emotion.
So what is the actual argument here?
The argument is that you can't get mind from mere matter. You can't start with dead rocks and end up with Shakespeare. But if you start with a conscious mind, a creator, then it makes total sense that we, created in that image, would possess consciousness.
Okay, I have to play the skeptic here for a minute. I've been nodding along, but I know there are people listening who are yelling at their speakers right now. The big objection that always comes up is the God of the gaps. Isn't this just us saying, we don't know how the flagellum works, so magic did it?
That is definitely the #1 objection. But Meyer argues that's a total misunderstanding of the argument. He says this isn't an argument from ignorance. It's an argument from knowledge.
Break that down for us.
Take the DNA example. We aren't saying we don't know how DNA got there, so God did it. We are saying we know, we positively know, that information only comes from intelligence. We are applying what we know about cause and effect to the evidence we see in front of us. It's not about what we don't find, it's about what we do find. Code, motors, fine-tuning.
Another objection the source addresses is the motive objection. Skeptics claim these intelligent design proponents are just biased Christians.
And the rebuttal there is pretty straightforward. Motives are totally irrelevant to the validity of scientific arguments. If a scientist is religious, it doesn't invalidate their data. You have to judge the evidence itself, not the person presenting it.
Fair enough. What about the bad design argument? The source brings up the human eye. Critics like Dawkins say the vertebrate retina is wired backwards. It has a blind spot. If a designer exists, why is he making rookie engineering mistakes?
This is called dysteleology. And the rebuttal in the source material is fascinating. It turns out the critics were actually wrong about the physiology. The retina needs a massive oxygen supply. The wiring has to be that way to accommodate the blood flow required for our high-resolution vision.
So it's not a mistake, it's a feature.
It's a necessary trade-off. Meyer uses a laptop analogy. If you want a laptop to be light and portable, you have to make the screen smaller and the battery lighter. That's not bad design. That is an engineering constraint. You judge the design by how well the whole system functions, not by isolating one part and complaining about it.
Plus, the source notes that the Bible doesn't actually claim the world is currently perfect. It acknowledges decay and deterioration. So a flaw might just be a sign of wear and tear, not a bad original design.
Right. The theological context matters if you're going to critique the theological claim.
So let's zoom out a bit. We have the Big Bang, the fine-tuning, the DNA, the motors, the Cambrian explosion, and consciousness. When you stack all these up, who are we talking about? This isn't just a vague force, is it?
The source argues for a cumulative case. They all connect. From cosmology, we get a designer who is transcendent, timeless, and non-spatial, essentially spirit. From physics and astronomy, we get a designer who is incredibly intelligent and caring, making a precise habitat for humanity. From consciousness, we get a person.
And Strobel points out that this rules out other philosophical options, like deism, for example, the idea that God wound up the clock and walked away.
Deism fails because of the biological evidence. The Big Bang happened roughly 14 billion years ago, but the origin of life and the Cambrian explosion happened much, much later. That shows the designer didn't just walk away. He was active long after the beginning, inputting new information into the system.
And it rules out pantheism, the idea that God is the universe.
Because if God is the universe, God didn't exist before the universe. You need a cause that is separate from the effect. And polytheism is ruled out by Occam's razor, which suggests a single, unified cause for the uniform laws of physics.
So we land on a theistic personal creator. Now, I want to pivot to Lee Strobel's personal journey here because he uses a great analogy about the Ford Pinto trial.
Oh, this is a classic legal thriller moment. Strobel covered this trial as a journalist back in the day. The prosecutor was incredibly cocky. He challenged the defense attorney to prove the Pinto was actually stopped when it was hit. He thought he had the case in the bag. He was basically strutting around the courtroom.
I can picture it perfectly. The ultimate slam dunk case.
Exactly. But then the defense produced surprise witnesses. They found hospital workers and an actual eyewitness who saw the car was definitively stopped. These witnesses came out of nowhere and completely destroyed the prosecutor's case.
And Strobel felt like that prosecutor.
He did. He thought Darwinism was an open and shut case against God. He admits he was pretty arrogant about it. But then he started investigating, and the surprise witnesses kept showing up.
The witness of cosmology. The witness of genetics.
Right. He realized the evidence just wasn't on his side anymore. The surprise witnesses of modern science were systematically dismantling his atheism.
There's one last story in the source material that I found really moving. It's not about legal battles. It's about a husband and wife. Viggo Olsen.
Yes. Viggo Olsen was a brilliant surgeon, cum laude medical degree, incredibly sharp guy. He and his wife were agnostics, and they actually set out to scientifically debunk Christianity because his wife's parents were religious. They made a formal list titled Scientific Mistakes in the Bible.
They were going to perform surgery on the text, dissect and kill it.
That was the plan. But a funny thing happened. They couldn't fill the list. Every time they thought they found a scientific mistake, like, oh, the Bible says the earth is a circle, not a sphere, they'd research deeper and realize the original Hebrew word actually implies a sphere. Instead of mistakes, they found incredible consistency.
And the turning point wasn't just raw data. It was deeply relational.
It was. Viggo had come up with one final, very clever intellectual objection. He came home to tell his wife Joan about it, and she just looked at him and asked, but Vic, haven't you, after all our studies, really come to believe Christ is the Son of God?
Wow. That question just pierced right through him.
It did. He realized the intellectual barriers were completely gone. The evidence had done its job. It had cleared the path. He admitted he believed. And they didn't just change their minds, they radically changed their lives. They moved to Bangladesh to build a hospital,
which Viggo called the greatest adventure. It really shows that this isn't just dry academic debate. It has real traction in people's lives.
It does. And I think the big takeaway for you listening to this is this concept of fusion. The old warfare model is dead. The sources argue that scientific facts act as signposts. They point beyond themselves to something greater.
And that faith isn't about closing your eyes. It's about opening them.
Right. The definition of faith presented here is trusting the guide, because the map he left behind, the map of the universe, has proven to be perfectly accurate.
You know, there is a thought from Oxford professor Alistair McGrath in the notes that I think is the perfect place to land today. He talks about looking up at the stars.
It's beautiful. He asks why the night sky evokes such a profound sense of longing in us, a sense of almost homesickness.
Yeah, that feeling of being so small, but also intricately connected.
And he suggests something fascinating. What if that void, that longing, is actually a clue? What if we feel homesick for the stars because we were designed for a destiny that lies entirely beyond this physical world? What if the science is just the signpost and the destination is something far more personal?
That is a profound question to leave you with. Is the void you feel actually a calling card? That's it for this deep dive into the case for a creator. Thanks for listening.